Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hi, everyone. It's Susan Coffin here for Attitude Magazine. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Michele Novotni. She is internationally recognized as an expert in the field of ADHD. She was one of the founders and the former president and CEO of the National Attention Deficit Disorder Association, and is the author of numerous books, including one of my favorites, What Does Everybody Else Know That I Don't? She has a website, www.michelenovotni.com, so please check her out. She did want me to disclose to all of you that she is also a paid consultant for Shire Pharmaceuticals. Having said that, she is a regular contributor to Attitude Magazine and to AttitudeMag.com, and we're fortunate to have her words in almost every issue. So, with no more ado, let me introduce Michele, who will have a few words, and then we'll take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and appreciate the intro. And also want to give a shout-out for Attitude Magazine and all the wonderful work you guys do in helping to promote awareness and information for people with ADHD. So I'm happy to be part of that. All right, in thinking about today's information about adults with ADHD, I thought it might be helpful before we took questions to just sort of go over some of the kinds of advice I tend to share in my private practice as I work with adults with ADHD. So I sort of have gleaned some of the best of tips, ideas, or thinking about ADHD to share with folks to kick us off. So I talk about the fact that managing ADHD is really more like a marathon than a sprint. I've got a son who's a marathon runner, and when you're planning to do something for the long term, sometimes you set yourself up differently than if it's just a short-term thing. So I know with children, there's an often thought that, it's going to be better next week, it'll be better next month, it'll be better when. But as an adult, it's important to think of this as a long-term issue. It's really chronic, it's brain-based. And so it's going to really need some long-term strategies to not stress you out, your partner out, your family out. So it just helps to conceptualize it as a long-term piece. It's also important for individuals with ADHD to not just pay attention to what's wrong with them. So many times, like if you do the ADHD assessment, it has like 88 things that you don't do well. And, oftentimes there's challenges with this and challenges with that. But it's really, really, really important to pay attention to what you do well. I know when I coach individuals, I usually start each session with what's working well. And people are almost ready to kill me with the question because they want to talk about what's wrong. But by talking about what's right, we can usually build on those strengths and help people become more successful. Nobody usually is very successful in making their weaknesses stronger. You usually find your sweet spot in success when you make your strengths stronger. Personally, I happen to be in the bottom 10% of mechanical aptitude in the entire country. And so for me, it's difficult. So what I find is that, if I really, 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 really tried hard to be better mechanically, I could probably nudge up a bit. But it's not real good effort, energy for effort. So, what I do is I avoid doing that. That's the second part, is to try to outsource, barter, or creatively do go-arounds for the areas that aren't your strengths. And a lot of times you're going to find that there are people who actually enjoy what you don't like to do. And so if you can find ways to get as many of those pieces of the task off your plate, for instance, if you're in sales, you might be wonderful with people, but when you have to fill out all the forms, that can make you crazy. So, there's some nice administrative assistance either through your companies perhaps or privately that you can get to do your go-around. It's really important to make sure you're optimized, whether you're using medications or non-medication alternative treatment strategies. If you're still having a lot of breakthrough ADHD symptoms that are getting in your way, you might want to go back and sort of rethink your treatment strategy. Perhaps your meds could be tweaked. Perhaps they need to be changed. Perhaps you need something in addition, like maybe adding some mindfulness or some yoga could help, or doing some physical activities. So again, if you're not optimally functioning, I'd encourage you to go back and rethink sort of what you're doing to manage ADHD. And I would like to also caution people that not everybody is really, really good at managing adults with ADHD. It's a pretty newly emerging field from a clinical perspective. And so if you're not working with somebody who really understands adult with ADHD, they might not be as eager to help you get optimized. So if you're not being successful or as successful as you'd like, I'd encourage you maybe to reach out and get a consult with somebody who really specializes in this field, because they might have some things that they could add that might really, really help you be more effective. And even things like co-occurring conditions, whether there's depression, anxiety, ADHD often exists with those things, and sometimes people get confused and they think something's one of those things when it's really something else. So, make sure you're really being taken care of well, because nobody's going to be as invested in your treatment as you are. So surround yourself with some of the best help you can get. The fourth slide talk about gadgets and apps and technology might be able to help manage your symptoms. And again, in Attitude Magazine, each month they do feature different apps. And I've had fun sort of coming up with those, and others have done that before me as well. So, I'd encourage you, again, to see what's out there that might make your life easier, to keep on track and to keep your priorities set. So, again, technology is coming, making really good advances. And finally, realizing that you are unique and you will respond differently to things, and you do have different needs than others. But I'd also like to encourage you not to start from scratch every single time. You don't always have to reinvent the wheel. I'd encourage you to see what other strategies and structures and supports are out there and maybe tweak them, to meet your own needs. But you don't probably have to start all over again. So again, whether it's listening to webinars like this one, or reading some books, or reading some articles, or going to support group meetings, or going to meetups, there's a growing amount of opportunities for adults with ADHD to learn from others. And I'd encourage you to do that. So again, you don't have to start from nothing each time. And also it helps to realize you're not alone. Whether you're supporting somebody with ADHD or whether you have ADHD, it really helps to know you aren't alone and that others have walked that way. And again, we're fortunate to have some really good organizations. There's CHAD and ADA, and CHAD is the CHADD.org. ADA is ADD.org. And Attitude Magazine has a Connect part of their website as well, attitudemag.com. So again, I'd encourage you to reach out to others, join part of the communities, get the information you need, and then also think about giving back to others in the ADHD community as well. What have you learned that other people might benefit from, so that we keep on adding to the pool that's out there.
That's a great recommendation, Michelle, and I just want to underscore the fact that there are some wonderful support groups that the CHAD organizes. We try to list them on the Attitude Mag website. We have an events calendar. You can find it on ADD Connect, where you can also communicate with other people online. But we do list the CHAD chapters and their meetings when we know about them there, and we encourage you to go to chad.org to find a chapter. And I want to agree with Michelle, there's nothing like meeting other people who have your same situation. So thank you, Michelle. Let me just start off with a question from she says she's a 47-year-old professional wife and mother of 3, and the biggest single culprit of her entire life is that her inability to wake up and get going in the morning, no matter how much sleep she gets. She says, waking up for me is like trying to come out of a coma. It's been this way my whole life. Even when I'm awake, it takes, she's like molasses, it takes hours before she's fully awake. She takes her medication ASAP, but this doesn't seem to make a significant difference. And this has a ripple effect on all her relationships, her husbands, her kids, her job, and everything. And it's just something that she feels like she's a failure, but it's not a choice. It's not that she's choosing to be sleepy in the morning. So looking for advice on that.
Okay, and a lot of individuals with ADHD really, really, really struggle with sleep. And sleep is sort of one of the kingpins. If you don't have that one, it makes it harder to do all the organization priorities, tasks, stay on focus. The one thing I would have said, except for her comment, is to make sure you're getting to bed on time to allow yourself enough sleep, although she seemed to allude to the fact that it didn't matter how much sleep she got. So the first thing would be to really check and see if you're sleeping, if you're really sleeping. Now, again, not everybody needs only 8 hours of sleep. Unfortunately, there's people that really need 9 or 10 hours of sleep. and there's people that can get by pretty easily on 7. So again, the first thing would be, how much sleep do you really need? And the key to that would be that you actually wake up without an alarm clock. So if you go to bed and wake up with an alarm clock, that's sufficient sleep. The second possibility that comes to mind is that perhaps she has some kind of sleep disorder like sleep apnea. Many individuals with sleep apnea actually wake up repeatedly throughout the night and aren't aware of it as they sort of take little gasps for air. They may snore or make other kind of noises. And if you have sleep apnea, it doesn't matter how long you sleep, you're going to be not rested because you never go into the deep sleep cycle. So she could check out with a sleep disorder center for some more specific ideas, and I'd strongly recommend that. And if you wanted a quick go-to in between, there's actually an app called Sleep Cycle, under $5, and you can, as long as you sleep alone, you can set it and put it on your bed at night, and then it actually records how often you fall into the deeper levels of sleep and how much time you spend in the upper levels, and so it'll actually give you a pretty cool graph of your night of sleep. So again, that's under $5. You can download it, and that might be a start. But again, if you're not sleeping well, it's important to go check that out. And again, there's things like melatonin that some people can take and other kind of natural kind of pieces. There could be medication for sleep. It could be things like turning off electronics. It could be things like turning on electronics to light up your brain so that you can settle. I have some clients that actually drank coffee before they went to bed to help them sleep, other people that would keep up all night. So again, this would be one of the cases to work with somebody, but might want to check out the app first, too, and see actually how long is she sleeping and what level of sleep.
Okay, that's a great suggestion. I just wanted to chime in to say that I got something called Fitbit, which is a little pedometer that you wear, and it also charts your sleep cycles. It's been really interesting to be able to see each day, how many times I actually did wake up during the time I thought I was asleep. So yeah, there's such great technology out there now that
what was yours?
Definitely. It's called Fitbit, Fitbit. It's a little tiny sensor. You wear it on your clothes, and it measures all your movement and as well as during the night your sleep cycles, and it syncs wirelessly to your computer. It's pretty cool.
Gotta love technology.
I know, it's the best. Here's a question that, boy, didn't sound so familiar. My main issue is that I have trouble starting tasks. I know what I have to do. I study all the possibilities. I research, and I drag, and then I get angry and frustrated with myself, but I just can't seem to break this problem, and I can't seem to get started.
Yeah, it can be tough. And again, I think part of it is with people with ADHD in particular, that especially if it's something you don't prefer doing,
right.
You procrastinate and put it off. A couple strategies that may help. One is sometimes it helps if you separate out the startup and the prep work for the task from the tasks. So, for instance, if you're going to do, say, get your taxes together, so what you might do is to start the task, you might just, find your file or your box or your pile that has some receipts in it, and that's all you do that time. Or if you were cooking, you might just get out the ingredients in the pan, but not actually do the actual cooking. So sometimes if we separate out the prep from the task, that makes it a little bit easier. Plus, then that much of it's already done, so it's easier to jump into it once something's started. Sometimes, too, I know when I write, sometimes it's hard to get started writing. And so, like, one of the strategies that sometimes helps is to just have a sloppy first draft. And so even if you just write mumbo-jumbo on the page, there's something about not starting with a blank piece of paper that makes it easier to edit it, and to go from there. So that might help. Another strategy that might help would be to set a timer with a start time and a stop time. One of the fears is that if you start, it's going to take forever. And so the idea would be to have a specific time in mind when you're starting and stopping, so that way you won't feel like you're going to be trapped. It also could help if you do something fun before you start a non-preferred task. So say you like to dance. If you put on your favorite music and dance a little bit and then go into your task, you might find that it's easier because your brain would already have been lit up and aroused. So a little bit better to do it. There's also things like body double, where you have somebody come and watch over you and make sure you do what you don't want to do and sit with you. I've had a number of clients who have had somebody, and they can just be in the room. They can be in the room reading a magazine, doing their own work, but they know that you intended to do this. I've actually had clients come to my office just to get a nasty report done. And so I would just check with them in between some of the clients. I'd say, and it's funny, some of them would try sneaking out to go get a cup of coffee or something, and my secretary would be funny. She's like, "Are you supposed to be leaving?" And I'll go, "Oh, but I wanted to get some coffee." And she said, "Did Michelle say it was okay for you to leave and go get coffee? We have coffee here." And they went, "No, ma'am," and they turned around and went back in. I've had some people who even had their pets or stuffed animals act as their guard as a body double. So again, sometimes there's some creative ways to have somebody, but if you make a commitment and have somebody come over to make sure you do it, it's sort of like getting a personal trainer. Once you've already paid for it, it's like, oh, I might as well go. So those might be some strategies to help them get started.
Those are great suggestions. Let me just say that a couple of people posted that they couldn't hear the name of this little tool that I was mentioning. It's Fitbit, Fitbit. If you Google it, you'll find it. And I think you said, Michelle, My Sleep Cycle. Was that the name of the app?
I don't know if it was mine. I know it's Sleep Cycle. It might be
Cycle. Okay, Sleep Cycle.
Yeah.
Okay. There are a number you had mentioned earlier in your presentation that it was really important to get someone to work with you and not to try to go this path alone. So there are a number of questions about in the area of finding professional help if you're a person with adult ADHD. Two main questions is, how do I find someone? Where do I find them? How do I look for someone who specializes in the field? And what am I looking for? And then another person asks, is there a kind of therapy that works best? I mean, should I look for a cognitive behavior therapist, or how is that different from an ADD coach? And what is your recommendation on the type of therapist one should look for if one's looking to address adult ADHD?
Wow. Okay. Let me unpack this. And it's really, really important because it's not as easy to find people as you would think. So one of the first big screens would be if somebody advertises themselves as somebody who specializes in ADHD. You would have more luck in the fact that at least if they're paying money to put out ads, that they're more likely to have ADHD as one of their skills in their bag there. So again, there's websites like at WebMD, and people list themselves by their specialties. The psychological associations have psychologists listed by their specialties. I think Psychology Today lists psychologists, and you can search by specialties. But now, again, that would be one level of screening. That would be just them saying, I want to work with these kind of people. The best way to find somebody would be word of mouth. Somebody who's worked with somebody who likes somebody. So, if you have a counselor that's working with your child who is wonderful, a lot of times the people that work with kids don't work with adults, but they might be able to refer you to somebody who they really love who works with adults. Or if you have a psychologist or a coach you're working with, they might have a physician who they send most of their people to who does a really nice job for them. Or if you have a physician, they might be able to send you to a coach. So again, once you find one, you can usually find several others. But I would say the word of mouth is probably one of the strongest ways to find somebody. I would check to see how they present themselves. So, if on their website or if on their ads they say they specialize in the following 20 areas, I'd probably run away because nobody can specialize in 20 areas. You also might want to do a screening call to their office and see, about what percentage of their practice is adults with ADHD. And the secretary should be able to tell you that pretty easily, whether they have about 10% of the folks they work with are adults with ADHD or 95% of the people they work with are adults with ADHD. And again, this is where also connecting in those support groups can help. Although none of the organizations officially are allowed to give you recommendations, when you're having coffee or a drink before or after the meetings, most people are more than willing to sort of share who they see and what their experiences have been. And that can be pretty invaluable. So those would be some rough ways to get started. And again, I think the CHAD website also has a directory The coaches have directories. So if somebody's advertising themselves as an ADHD specialist, that's a good place to start. In terms of what kind of therapy, yes, it absolutely makes a difference what kind you use. I would definitely recommend cognitive behavior therapy, which is a lot like coaching. So it's going to be more practical-based. It's going to be more what's going on, what can we do different. So again, it's more solution, let's deal with now. We're not going to go back and see if you weren't potty trained right, and we're not going to go back to what your mother said when you were 6 years old kind of thing. So somebody who has a strong foundation in cognitive behavioral psychology should be most effective, as long as, and this is a really important caveat, they also have a background in ADHD with adults. Because if they don't get the adult ADHD piece, then they might frame things as you're doing it on purpose, you're passive-aggressive, you're just not trying. So you actually need somebody with that dual background of cognitive behavioral and ADHD. And ADHD is really, really important. I know I've sent a lot of clients for, say, couples counseling. And if the couples therapist doesn't understand ADHD, it comes back being a nightmare, with some of the things that are being said and seen. So whoever you see has to have ADHD first, and then that would be the background. And then coaching is a little different in that coaches come from a variety of backgrounds. So again, psychologists, therapists, and things, have to go through school and training and programs and things. Coaching is still an unregulated field, although there was a coach certification that has now just disbanded as of December. So some of the coaches, we could say that we're like a senior certified ADHD coach. There's also ICF, the International Coaching Federation. So those would be credentials that you would look for. So again, with a coach, you'd want the same thing. You'd want somebody who has some kind of training in coaching, but especially you want somebody who really gets ADHD, because otherwise they won't know why you need to get 3 phone calls set up so that you can get to work on time, or just those kind of things just wouldn't make sense to somebody that doesn't understand this world. So I would look for, again, a certified coach and one, again, who has specialties in ADHD. And if it's not a good match, move on and go get somebody else. So again, sometimes it could take 2 or 3 times to have somebody who feels right to you. Because even if they have all the right credentials, if it doesn't feel comfortable, I would suggest moving on. And if you're not making progress and you've given it a sufficient time, I'd suggest moving on too.
Okay. Just finding that fit being such a critical part of the therapy equation. This is a question from someone who has kind of a classic impulsivity. She or he, I'm not sure, it says, I'm 43 and I've been in many difficult situations due to my lack of ability to think before doing something or saying something. As a result of that, I've built up all kinds of anxiety because I'm always second-guessing myself to avoid saying something wrong or doing something wrong. And sort of fearful, about to get a promotion at work, and she's very fearful that she will sabotage herself with statements or impulsive activities. She's very anxious about blurting things out or doing things that are inappropriate.
Okay. Again, impulsivity and failing to stop and think first before saying or do something, very, very common for many adults with ADHD. The resultant anxiety is also very, very common, because if something's going to come out before you get a chance to think about it, that definitely makes the world a lot more stressful. I still remember when Jared, my son, was little, and, I forget, I'd asked him to stop and think first before he did it. And he just sort of looked at me. He's like, how do you do that? It's like, well, when the thought pops in your head, you decide if that's a good choice or not a good choice. And then you do it or don't do it. And he just looked at me, and he was only like 5 or 6, and he said, Mom, that part of my brain just must be broken. He said, by the time I think about it, I've already done it.
Exactly.
And as I work with adults with ADHD, that actually neurologically can be part of the issue. So my first piece would be I would double, triple check to make sure that medication, if the person is using medication, is optimized. Because again, with ADHD being an under-aroused brain, things come out and go in without being filtered. So that's actually neurologically based behavior. And that's one area where medication may be able to help or may be able to help more. So medication comes to mind as one of the first strategies. The second one would be to maybe use some kind of cueing system before you're going to be in a meeting or before you're going to go someplace. You know, if you could cue yourself to remember to stop and think first. And some people can have an alarm that just vibrates. I know like Watchminder some people had used, and you can set it just to quietly vibrate on your arm every minute if you wanted. And that would just be like somebody tapping you saying, hey, 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 remember not to say something stupid, and it'll help. The other piece, and this one actually works, you know the old saying like hold your tongue? But you actually can put your tip of your tongue on the top of your mouth behind your front teeth. And by placing it there, it actually takes you longer to blurt something out or to say something. And you actually can have that moment to pause before you say something. So that might be helpful. And also, if you're going to work with somebody in the long term, at some point, you might want to tell people that sometimes I just think out loud and ramble some things. You know, and if I say something that doesn't make sense or whatever, just flag me, and I'll come back around to it. So again, if you don't want to disclose you have ADHD, at least if you let people know that sometimes things come out a little bit unfiltered, that way they might be a little less angry or frustrated in case something comes out unfiltered. And, you know, you could say things like, sometimes I think so fast that I don't quite get a chance to filter all my thoughts. So if something comes out a little bit messy, just give me a heads up and I'll clarify it.
Okay, that's great. Here's a question by someone who says, you know, I'm a very intelligent 51-year-old diagnosed with inattentive ADHD just 3 years ago. I've had great success in jobs when I start out, but then inevitably I get overwhelmed and it's crash and burn and I lose my job. And this is a repeat pattern, which has been going on throughout my work life, and it's getting more and more frequent. I mean, I have shorter employment terms and longer times between reemployment as I get older. This person's wondering, you know, can she or he be developing worse ADHD or less ability to cope? What could be going on that would make this these symptoms somehow seem worse and worse as time passes?
A couple factors can be making it worse, and then we can talk about some of the strategies. You know, one, our society in general is requiring more and more and more and more of us. So I think in the workplace in general, you know, people are probably doing 2 to 3 times the amount of work that used to get done in the past. So just the sheer volume of things that have to be tended to is hugely more than ever was needed before. And also the time frame turnarounds. I mean, if somebody sends you an email or a text and you don't jump on it, it's like, well, I sent you a text, you know, I sent you an email like 3 minutes ago. Where were you? So, you know, everybody wants you to be totally focused on responding, and yet everybody wants you to be focused on doing your job. And with ADHD, it's hard to get started. And then if you get started and you get distracted by something, it's a nightmare. So the fact that we have more to do is one thing, and the fact that we have all this need for instant responding, which is constant interruptions, which is an ADHD hell, has something to do with it. If the person were a woman, we also have menopausal issues starting, and that just throws women's ability to attend, focus, problem solve. You know, that definitely all does a dive a bit for most people. So some of that could be hormone related. I know when Dr. Patty Quinn talks about women and their hormones, she has a whole big thing about the need to regulate your hormones more and maybe even adjust medications if you're premenopausal because of the impact of that with women. So if it's a woman, they might want to check out Patty Quinn's information about women with ADHD, especially around that time of the life. If it's not just a woman and it's a man, or if it's all of us, we also have the fact that as we age, we actually, unfortunately, get a little bit less flexible, a little bit less quick at things. So time really does slow us down. So luckily, we tend to be smarter because we've learned a lot over time. But, you know, if you put a 20-year-old in the office place against a 50-year-old in the office place, you know, there's certain tasks that 20-year-old is going to do a lot quicker. I remember my mother-in-law making a Thanksgiving dinner one time, and it took her like the entire afternoon to do like turkey and mashed potatoes and corn. And I, for the life of me, could not understand how it possibly could have taken that long, because I could whip around and do that in no time at all. And, recently as I'm doing stuff, it's taken me the better part of an afternoon to throw together something. So it just sort of takes longer to do some things than we used to be able to do. So I think that's part of it, too. The other part that intrigued me was it might not even be an age issue. Susan, as you sort of described the problem, you said that the person starts out well and then sort of gets overwhelmed. A lot of people with ADHD like the front part of the tasks. They like the initial thrill. They like the newness. They like the getting things started, figuring things out, big picture, blue sky. And then later on, when it comes to the actual details of doing it, a lot of them tank. I had one couple that I worked with. I thought they were actually a married couple that was like on the verge of divorcing, but they worked together. They were colleagues. And she was ready to kill the guy because they were in stocks. And the guy was great at getting attention and jumping on quick things. But when it came to reviewing people's portfolios at the end of every year and getting the reports and the documents out to him, he was terrible. And so when I looked at them, and they were in business for themselves, I said, well, is it important that he does the front and the back end? And, they looked at me and said, well, both need to get done. It's like, yeah, I know both need to get done. But I said, I'm guessing he's a better starter than you are. And I'm guessing you're equal at starting and finishing. And she looked at me and nodded. I said, so what if he started them all and then passed them on to you to finish? Could that work? I said, because I bet you'll probably double your money if you switch strategies.
Well,
and and they're like, well, that's not how it's supposed to be. It's like, well, he's got ADHD. He gets excited by something that's new. He's probably better at jumping on opportunities. But if he passes them on once he gets bored, thinking you're equally good at either, let's make him, and again, this reverts to the slide, let's make his strength stronger. He's a great starter. So let's see where we can do that. So part of it might be to have her or him take a look at what tasks were involved in starting that, sort of that they did well, and what tasks sort of created the overwhelm. Is it an assertion issue where they weren't able to say no? Like in sales, you always under-promise and over-deliver. So some people just keep on saying yes, and they don't really understand how overburdened they'd be. But it could be just that the tasks in managing are worse for them to do than the front end. So, this could be a case where the person might be better being out on their own or being a consultant and doing the front ends. But I'd encourage the person to really take a look at what did they do well and where might that be a good fit, just as one other option to consider.
Right. It's really interesting you say this because there are several questions here from people who, in response to my asking about the person who said they couldn't get started, people who say, I can get started fine. My problem is follow through. There's Chrissy who says, I have the best of intentions. I start projects and ideas really well, but finishing it seems impossible. I buy presents for people to thank them for helping me, but then I never send them the present. I never finish the task. Filing just never gets done. Another person here, Terry, similar statement. Just can't seem to get things done. So it sounds as if that's not an uncommon problem.
Right. So the one would be if they're really good at, say, finding the present for somebody, because that's fun. And it actually can be quite hard to find something that somebody might like. But the actual putting it in a box, taking it to get sent out is boring. So, again, here's where, if you hire a college kid for like $10 an hour, they might do all the finishing up of your task because anybody can pack something in a box and take it to a shipping place and get it sent off. So if that's something you really don't prefer to do, you might be able to buy your way out of that one or trade, or you might be able to work out a trade with somebody to pick off the task. Now, where most people with ADHD have a problem is they don't pass on the task. They stop doing it thinking they're going to do it tomorrow. And again, this is where the marathon instead of the sprint thing comes back into play. That, if this is a long-term issue, as soon as they reach a point where they don't want to do it anymore, they need to pass it on to somebody else who will take it over the finish line. So that would be a piece. The other one is there's a strategy where you pick your top 2 or top 3 things, and you go because with ADHD you get bored and you don't want to do the same thing over and over and over again for too long. So this strategy, like I said, let's do the power of two, is you pick two tasks that you must do or you want to do. And when you get bored or tired of doing one, you jump to the other one. When you get bored or tired of that one, you must jump back to the first one. So you can't jump too far, because a lot of people with ADHD will start 40, 50, 60
jump to a new project, right?
Right. So the idea would be to just jump between those two and see if that helps with that jumping back and forth. There's also an app called Top 3. In Top 3, you can go between your top 3 apps, your top 3 things that you want to do. And then when you knock one off, you're down to 2, and then when you knock 2 off, you're down to 1. But at least you've done parts of them, so sort of that problem starting. So the idea is to really put some rails around it. And
that's a great suggestion.
There's a website that I've been working with for Shire called You Do the Rest, and it's U, like the letter U, do the rest. And there's a whole bunch of apps in different categories there for prioritizing, organizing, and a bunch of tips as well for helping you to stay on track. So that might be good for people to check out, just some of these wonderful tools. But again, Top 3 is one of the apps on there.
Top 3.
Again, that just puts up your study rails, and that you can only go among those. So sometimes that helps people. There's also a coaching strategy called hooking, where you do something you must do before you do something you always do. So like say you come home from work and you get changed all the time. So you would set up a rule for yourself that before I get changed, I must brush my teeth. Say you hadn't brushed your teeth or flossed your teeth. So you wouldn't let yourself get dressed and changed until you flossed your teeth. Or say you're trying to save your receipts and they're all over the place normally. You wouldn't get changed until you put your receipts in the box or in the folder. So sometimes that kind of thinking, the hooking strategy, might help too.
That's great. One thing I was going to say on this is that on the Attitude site, if you go to the Adult ADHD channel, and then go to Life Stories, we did a series of articles in which adults talked very specifically about how they worked with coaches to change their lives. And it's really amazing the things that people accomplished by when many of the strategies that Michelle's talking about are illustrated there in people's lives about specific challenges that they gave themselves or ways that they solved things. And anyway, I find it very inspirational to read about how other people solved just little daily problems that in the end becomes super annoying.
I remember a question. I was with one of my clients. I still remember.
I think we did one profile of you and a client. It was great.
Yeah, his wife would. He was the one that would have his wife sit in the room and make him do his task. And I think he also came up with a mantra: "Do it now, or there's hell to pay." And he had to pick up himself with a toupee to remind him, "Do it now, or there's hell to pay."
Right. Yeah. No, it's really great. It's just little really helpful items in those stories, and it's very great to see people change their lives in that way.
Yes,
here's a question. Yeah. Here's a question from Zoe. I'll go ahead and say her name. I hope she won't mind. Usually I'm just giving the first names here. Zoe Kessler, who blogs about ADHD on Psych Central. She says, I've blogged about being an adult with ADHD, and I feel like I've hit a wall in treatment. What I feel like is I'm still me. I'm a different me. And my readers at Psych Central on my blog also sort of many of them felt the same way. And she's asking you, Michele, have you seen a stage in your practice with ADHD adult clients where they've made some changes, they don't really recognize themselves, they know they've changed from before, but they want to move forward more? What do they do to break out of that, sort of out through that wall that they might have hit at a certain point? Do you recognize that phenomenon, and have you seen that in other clients?
Absolutely. And sometimes the wall is just sort of time to acclimate to all the changes that you've made and sort of figure out who you are with these new sets of skills. The other piece might be that maybe you need to surround yourself with some new ideas, new people, new resources, maybe a different coach, or a different therapist. So I think the suggestion would be, what else haven't you tried that you might want to do? So what areas are you still struggling with, or which areas do you think you still might be able to do better in? and then take a look at who might be on your team that might help you get there. Because the people that help you get to one level or the people that help you in one area might not necessarily be the same people you'd want to bring to help you into another area. So again, even among coaches, some coaches are good at, helping you get your paperwork done, and some coaches might be good at helping you, in your business. Some might be good at helping you with entrepreneurial things. So again, there's different people with different specialties. And also, again, there's just different personalities and different thoughts. And sometimes all it takes is just one idea. Like let's say with some of the college kids, we talk to them about, people work about 40 hours a week or more. When you go to college, that is your job. What if you rethink college as a job, and pretend you're at a full-time job and therefore book out 40 hours a week to be working. And so it's a simple concept, but once you sort of rethink it, it's like, oh, yeah. So again, maybe reach out to some other people and see, but first think about what it is you want to do next that you're not now doing, and then take a look of all the resources that are out there, who might be on your team to help you do the next piece.
So some specific goals. What's on the other side of this wall that you're trying to get to? Saying,
and what have you tried, and also to go back to, again, like with the initial slides, what strengths do you have that you might be able to leverage better? And again, everybody's always looking at what they're doing wrong. I'm hitting the wall. I'm not finishing this. I'm not finishing that. And again, I'd really encourage you, but what have you done? How have you gotten from where you were to where you are? What did you do? How did you do it? How did you get yourself to do it? And is there any of that you can tap into to pull it up for the next level? Because, again, I think you're most successful when you're really leveraging the heck out of your strengths.
Right. A question from Michael. He says, I really do much better in structured environments. I achieve more, but it's really hard for me to maintain structure. Do you have any comments suggestions as to how to keep a structure going?
Actually, for the folks I work with ADHD, we probably have to change up the structure because they get bored frequently. It's really important to have some kind of routine and structure, again, to put those study rails up kind of thing. But then what I find is that people get bored with things exactly like they are. So sometimes I encourage folks to change things up. So if this works for a while, when you start to see it not working as well, let's come up with a new structure. So say you had all your, all your files, hang files on top of your desk. What if you got like post office things and stuck them in there, or what if you used colors, or what if you used dots? And so sometimes if you make something newer and fresher, that can add excitement to get people maintaining schedules and structures, just sort of creating it and making it anew again. The other piece would be, if it really is the structure that needs to be there, helping you to remember why you decided to put the structure there in the first place. So if we hold the purpose behind our actions in front of us, oftentimes that helps us stay on course. Like sometimes work is work. And so, it's not supposed to be fun 100% of the time. But if we remember, oh, yeah, this is how I get to pay the mortgage, or this is how I'm going to put my kids through college, I'll go ahead and do this. So sometimes, again, if we keep in mind the higher reasons why we're doing this, that might help us. But usually
it's a visual reminder. Yeah, when I went to graduate school in a program that I really wasn't looking forward to, but I really felt I had to do because we were penniless. That's why I literally pinned a $5 bill to the bulletin board over my desk and said, okay, keep this in mind. It helped. It was like a visual reminder.
Yeah, I used to type bills when in grad school. We were poor too, and I used to type up the bill for a report. I loved doing the psychological reports and figuring things out, but I hated writing up the reports. So I would type up the bill and just put it right in front of me, and it's like, okay, this is why I'm doing this.
Right, exactly. Right. Some stuff you just got to do, right? Here's an interesting question. This is from a 40-year-old mom who's a part-time lawyer. Jennifer, she manages her ADD pretty well with meds. But she finds herself wondering, and this I think a lot of people feel this way, how much to share with others about having ADD. And when people want her to become involved in extra committees, and she's afraid that she might not make the deadlines or might be late, should she be authentic and share that why she's hesitating, or or risk, or would it be better just to sound like she's making excuses and not mention ADHD? I mean, what's your advice on sharing in a workplace situation?
Yeah, that was a tricky one. That one depends. I know legally, supposedly, we're fine and it's covered under the American with Disabilities Act and it shouldn't make a difference. However, I know that sometimes it can.
Right.
So if the ADHD is well managed, I mean, I think if people are really close with her and if it seems to make sense to share something, and if it feels safe, she might want to do that. And also a lot of times you can share the struggles that you have without sharing the actual word ADHD, which is what most of my folks do, is, I'm just worried that I'm overcommitted with this and with this, or, I'd be really good at this part, but I'm not quite sure I'll be able to hit some of those deadlines. Can you pair me up with somebody? Or, but think about ways of describing what your struggle is without actually using the ADHD word.
Right.
Because, again, some places, and usually you can sort of look around, and there's probably others who might have said the ADHD word and sort of see what happens to them. Some places where I've consulted have ADHD support groups for the staff, and it's open and it's encouraged, and, people with ADHD are actually provided with coaches, and it's lovely. In other places, it's an absolute nightmare. So I think it's a user judgment, but I would maybe describe the symptoms more, just it's hard for me to hit all those deadlines given everything else that's on my plate.
Right. There's really no need for anyone to know a label about you unless there's some reason to think. I think it's helpful. I mean,
the same with almost any medical. If you're struggling with depression, anxiety, hemorrhoids, you usually don't share all that information in the workplace.
Right. A question from Jeffrey, who's, quote, a lost 49-year-old. He says, Michelle, how come my social skills are those of a child?
Probably because they didn't learn what everybody else knows.
Right. What's the name of the book? Your book?
Yeah. What does
everybody else know that I don't know? Yeah.
Yeah. What happens is people with ADHD are often so focused on some of the details of basic survival that they don't pay attention to some of the nuances. So, for instance, with subtext and understanding what somebody really means, people don't always say what they mean. And for somebody with ADHD, it's hard enough to hear what they said, yet alone try to figure out if they said what they meant. I love watching the show. I don't know if you've seen the show Big Bang Theory, and they've got a guy on there, Sheldon, and he's a little Asperger-y, but it's just so funny because he's like, oh, is that sarcasm? And he's like, darn, I'm only 8 for 20 today. And I was trying to figure it out and figure out the world. But basically, people don't teach you social rules. And my clients are always shocked when it's like, well, nobody ever told me that, or how did I know that? So I would suggest that he, really make an effort to learn some of the things that he's getting blown up with. And again, this is where a coach could help. The book has a lot of information in it, and I will be updating it. I keep on working on that. But yeah, so those are things that just don't get picked up. So that's probably his problem.
Right.
I wish they would teach a course in social skills and effective problem solving in the schools. I think that would help a lot.
It's true. There's sort of a movement to teach planning and to teach financial planning, and why not teach social skills too, right?
I think
here's a question from someone who says, I have one thing I noticed in discussing with another person, including my husband, I have a real problem keeping track of the conversation. I get distracted. I lose some of the languages being said. And sometimes my comments are surface comments rather than taking in all the information. I do sometimes repeat what I think the other person said, but it's not always appropriate to do that. Do you have any suggestions for how to handle that?
Yeah, that's a real common problem because, again, if your attention is fluctuating, it's going to be hard to focus on what the person's saying. So a couple things come to mind. One is if they are using medication, they might want to have in-depth conversations when they're covered because, again, all the medications last different amounts of time. Some last 4 hours, some last 6, some last 8, some last 12. So a lot of adults maybe take medication first thing in the morning, even if it's an extended med, but by 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night, they are so not covered. So a lot of the docs might give, they can manage, and do some other kind of things to help them be covered. So that would be one piece. Another is it's okay to take notes. Again, if you're talking to somebody close, if you want to sort of jot down some of the thoughts as they're coming along so that you won't forget something. That works real well on the phone, too. If people can jot down some notes so that they don't get lost in the conversation. And if it's somebody you talk with regularly, you could ask them to talk in chunks. Some of the people that I work with, I actually have them set up meetings, say, with their partners, but make them 10-minute meetings. And so maybe once a night for 10 minutes, let's debrief on this. Because most people with ADHD, once somebody goes on beyond 10 minutes, their attention sort of wanes in and out. So if somebody's talking on and on and on and on and on and on, it's easy for them to get lost. But if you have shorter chunks of time, it might be easier to not get lost. There's also tape recording, if it's a situation where you can record something. That way you can come back and catch some of the important pieces. You can also ask the person for a summary of what they said. So again, you could try to summarize, okay, so the top 3 takeaways are blah, blah, blah. Or you can ask the other person, all right, so help me understand the 3 actions you want me to do. If you can do a recap. And a lot of times, again, if they work closely with somebody, I'll ask them to even ask for a recap in writing. So for a lot of my clients, I send them an email after our sessions with, some of the bullet points so that they can remember what we talked about. So again, this will be something with the give and take kind of thing. But yes, focusing during a conversation can be tough.
Yeah. There are a number of questions here that I just don't have time to get to about about tensions between members of a family over someone who has ADD and someone who doesn't. I'll just focus on one here. Last question from Julie. She says, I'm an artist and I have with studios and projects all over the house. I have 2 adult children who also have ADHD, and my husband is pretty fed up. I try to finish my projects, but there's so many boring jobs I have to finish first, and my husband comes home to messes every day. Sometimes I get so nervous about what to make for dinner that I don't even make any. What do you suggest for our family? Help.
Okay, that's a really big one. So it does sound like she could use some help. The first thing would be I would focus on the people without ADHD actually have needs too. And so there would need for some places in the house to not be cluttered, to be orderly. So they might want to negotiate that certain rooms will be off limits for messes. Maybe the kitchen, maybe a living room, maybe their bedroom. Or I don't know what it would be, but it would be really important for her husband to have a safe haven. It's not because, messes really do make people without ADHD nervous.
Right.
That would be important to sort of contain the mess to certain places. Or maybe if she can contain her artwork to a certain room, that would be helpful. Meal planning is also very interesting, too. In fact, I'm working with Terry Maitland on a book on ADHD in the kitchen, where we're talking about the process of planning and backwards planning for meals. Because it really
meal planning is just a nightmare for so many people with ADHD. Really, it's just the worst.
That's why we're working on just different strategies for cooking. So, there's simple things like in the beginning of a morning, you can throw something in a crock pot. And basically all you need is a hunk of meat or some vegetables or some kind of protein, some kind of liquid, and some kind of spice, and you really have food. So meals don't have to be these big elaborate things, and there's some really good go-tos. So again, I think it's important to realize that every day you will eat, and this is sort of like you don't have to reinvent the wheel. People might come up with every Monday is just going to be spaghetti, every Tuesday is going to be meatloaf, every Wednesday is going to be pizza and salad. So you can come up with the same kind of thing so that you don't always have to create from scratch every night. So that would be a piece of it, but I do feel like it's important for her to pay attention to her husband's need for some order, for some structure. And there's also a need for her to have that creativity. So it sounds like he's allowing her that creativity kind of thing, but I'm not sure he's getting his fair share of the structure that he needs.
Right. Well, Michele, I think we're out of time. This has been super great. Thank you so much for all your good thoughts and good ideas.
Thank you, Susan.
And we hope to have Michele on again in the future. Thank you so much.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.